So now in 2 Thessalonians, Paul's going to get a little bit more personal because really and truly those first 10 verses last week that we talked about in the first letter to Thessalonica, I just see that as very polite, very nice, giving Paul honor, introducing Silas, introducing Timothy and Paul as a team. And that's what we got from that. Verse 9 really summed it up. For they themselves show of what manner of entering, and we had you all, how you turned from idols to serve the living and the true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, even Jesus, which delivered us from wrath. I was reading, and because in Corinth we came across a place called Mars Hill, and it was so bad that they had a grave for every false god. Just in case they missed one, they even put to the unknown God. Thessalonica had a similar problem. Paul's not dealing with it as much. That's who these folks came from. It's that same mentality. Look at verse 1. For you yourselves, brethren, know our entrance into you, that it was not in vain. But even after we had suffered before and were shamefully entreated, as you know, at Philippi, we were bold enough in our God to speak unto you the gospel of God with much contention. For our exhortation was not of deceit, or of uncleanliness, nor of guile. So, in other words, Paul says, we did it right. You were there. You're the witnesses. We didn't barge in. We didn't. We have integrity, is what Paul's saying. My fellow laborers in our we have integrity. This section begins with Paul defends his own character in ministry to yet another church, as he's often done in the ones we've already studied. Remember, there was only couriers that carried word of mouth between the two cities where the home churches were taking place. So Paul again introduces himself. He'll reinstate his apostolic authority so that they'll know it was truly God that sent him, and that he was sincere about his ministry, but he was worried. In Acts chapter 17, don't forget, there were many enemies of the cross. They threw him out, they threatened him, they talked him down, they talked bad about him, put him in jail when they could. So he's making this self-revelation to the Thessalonians so that they know he's one of them. That he's not just talking it, he's walking it. Christian life too. He's answering the attacks that were made by scandal mongers, one commentator said, because of their hatred for him. Isn't it amazing what stories folks can make up about you if they hate you, if they dislike you? I mean, there may be a little kernel of some truth in there, but the one that they're focused on is the most damaging one that they can think of, and they make it this big when the truth of it is just in that. So Paul wanted them to know he was trying to be very careful, and that their ministry was from God, and the people hated it. People were jealous of it. Their egos flared up. Paul's emphatic writings in Thessalonians to witness did two things. First place, he showed his confidence in them. He had no fear that they would succumb to the propaganda being put before them. That's the problem. People are putting different gospels, which we know in another one of Paul's writing. He says, which is not another gospel. There's only one gospel. So what the devil has been doing anywhere he can to stall and stop the word of God, which he failed miserably, is to try to put doubt anywhere. So Paul was emphatic. False charges. Commentator said the following charges against Paul, evident from the way Paul explained himself in this chapter. They said this: Paul had a police record and therefore was untrustworthy. Where'd they get that from? Chapter 2, verse 2. Paul suffered referring to his imprisonment in Philippi. Paul is delusional. Take that from 1 Thessalonians 2. Paul's ministry has impure motives. 1 Thessalonians 2, uncleanness. Paul deliberately deceives others. Paul preaches to please others, not God. Paul is in the ministry as a mercenary to get what he can out of it materially. Paul only wants personal glory. Paul is a dictator. That was the accusations that the accuser of our brethren through the mouths of his enemies made. Some of them just utterly ridiculous. Ridiculous, because Paul went the extra mile to show none of those things were true. He had a pure heart. God had given him a job to do. And had he not done that, who knows who God would have had to have picked for Christianity to grow like it has, and us be practiced in 2025. So maybe next time someone says something about us that's not complimentary, maybe we can ask ourselves, does it rise to the level of being called delusional, deceitful, sneaky, greedy, wanting personal glory, and being a dictator? That's what Paul faced. So it was pretty harsh. He said, our coming to you wasn't in vain. It had meaning. It wasn't empty. It wasn't hollow. We weren't salesmen. We weren't marketeers. He had suffered even before. In Acts chapter 16, verse 22, he records the suffering of Paul included public flogging and having their feet in stocks while confined in the city's inner prison. Such a Roman flogging was no light matter. It was an experience not soon forgotten. Paul endured that. We know indignity and persecution weaken and completely break men's minds. It was therefore a work of God that Paul has suffered various misfortunes and indignity, and he appeared unaffected. He did not hesitate to launch an assault on a large and wealthy city for the purpose of leading them to Christ. At the time, that was Thessalonica. He says, we're bold to our God to speak out to you in the gospel of God in much. Despite what his accuser said, Paul said, we didn't just preach the gospel if it was easy and convenient. He knew that what it was like to speak boldly in a time of much conflict. The term we were bold in God to speak comes from the meaning of literally all speech. So we gave everything we said, we gave it all we had. So verses 3 through 5, let's just take a look at what God's word speaks to us. For our exhortation was not of deceit or of ungodliness or of guile, but as we were allowed to speak of God, to be put in trust with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God, which trieth our hearts. For neither at any time used we flattering words, as you know, as a cloak of covetousness. God is my witness. Nor of any man sought we glory, neither of you, nor yet of others, when we might have been burdensome as the apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, even as a nurse cherisheth her children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were willing to have imparted unto you, not the gospel of God only, but also our own souls, because you were dear to us. Let's talk about that for a second. Verse 7 is pretty graphic language, no matter which language it's treated. It's taken from it. Do we get a sense yet? All the books of Pauline authorship we've studied, get a sense of how much he loved these people who could do nothing for him. He was simply following what God told him to do. Absolutely amazing. He said, we didn't try to sell you. We didn't telemarket you. We didn't use flattering words. Just told you the truth, without greed, without ambition. Paul's gentle and humble attitude among the Thessalonians demonstrated his motives were pure. He we didn't seek glory from anyone. Just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children, that's how gently we care for them. Now, I know in our day and age, man saying that about a group of people, it's not the way we would put it. But at least hear his heart. At least feel what his heart is. Here's a man who knew God had called him to do a job. Like most every prophet in the Bible, and every man or woman that God called, they're sure of what God called them to do. Even though doubts may swirl around them, trouble comes, their life doesn't go as planned, they have losses like everyone else. Staying faithful and serving God is so important. So that's Paul's trying to get across his motives. They're newer in the faith, and his self-support and hard work among the Thessalonians demonstrated that his motives were pure. Okay, let's talk about it.